What actually are the odds of life developing on Earth, of the Abiogenesis event, which would have happened billions of years ago? What actually are the odds of such a thing happening? Somehow pulled off getting Shannon Q to hang up on him, which, like, she's the nicest person. If Shannon Q hangs up on you, that's something wrong with you.
Okay, for those that did not assist the episode, the 2nd of August, I called in at the line with Shannon Q and Paul. The first question I asked was, how can we explain our existence without a creator? No, Jimmy, there is nothing wrong with me. I was not impolite with Shannon, nor did I say anything that would or could have offended her. Neither was I rude or anything of the sort. Shannon most probably got cranky because I asked her a question which she was not expected to hear. Theists usually call into these shows in the attempt to justify their beliefs, but rarely someone calls in to actually defy the person on the other side to provide a justification for their own beliefs. Atheists think that the burden of proof relies only on the theist, which is obviously not true. If an atheist wishes to have a dialogue with the believer, he needs to be prepared to provide better explanations of our origins than top-tasting explanations. Shannon was unprepared to give that explanation and did pass the microphone to Paul, which basically said that science based on materialism does not have an answer, but hopefully one day it will find out, and it will most likely be a naturalistic explanation. This, of course, is a position which we, theists, are called out of without justification, by the way, namely that supposedly we close gaps of understanding with God. But that's precisely what Paul did, confessing to have no answer in regards of origins, but nonetheless being confident that science would find an answer, and that it would be a natural one. And that's precisely a materialism of the gaps argument. So Shannon did not like my observation and got cranky.
Get into this conversation that's basically the teleological argument or the Watchmaker argument. And the idea is that DNA is extremely complex. We read it like we read computer code. And there are those who are theists who say the complexity of it, and because it operates similar to a computer program, suggests there must have been a programmer. So this new version of the argument has to do with the fact that we have turned DNA into code that we can read. We have interpreted it that way, despite the fact that the letters that we use, for example, the letter T isn't literally there. But because we are able to interpret and translate and talk about these things in terms of a computer program, there are those who insist that it's because it is a computer program. Again, this is just a new version of the Watchmaker argument, and it is this concept that because complex functions happen, something must have given the organism that complex function.
This is my argument, Jimmy. Blueprints, machines, and factories come only from intelligence. 1. The origin of blueprints containing the information to fabricate complex machines and interlinked factories which produce goods for specific purposes are both always the result of intelligent setup. 2. Living cells store very complex genetic and epigenetic information through the genetic code and over 20 epigenetic languages, translation systems, and signaling networks. These information systems instruct the making and operation of cells and multicellular organisms. Each cell hosts millions of interconnected molecular machines, production lines, and factories, analogous to factories made by man. They are of unparalleled gigantic complexity, able to process constantly a stream of data from the outside world through signaling networks. Cells operate robot-like autonomously, and they adapt the production and recycle molecules on demand. The process of self-replication is the epitome of manufacturing advance and sophistication. 3. Therefore, the origin of biological information and self-replicating cell factories is best explained by the action of an intelligent designer who created life for his own purposes.
And that there was a design programmer.
That's correct, Jimmy. A program is a collection of instructions and data that is kept in the regular file.
But because it has been demonstrated to be a fact, and it is the history of our species and how we have gotten here, it basically just leaves them in this one spot because we already know how the mechanism by which our DNA and stuff has become so complex, and these apparent programs that we are reading that way, that we are describing that way, that aren't actually prescriptive in that way.
And in the book Information and Living Systems, we read, without information, the inflow of energy would not lead to self-organization. Information, in this sense, is more than information in the Shannon and Weaver sense. It is functional and can be thought of as information in both an instructional and control sense, as it requires information that creates complex structures, for example, enzymatic proteins, and metabolic pathways that productively channel the flow of energy both within an organism and between the latter and its environment.
Already have plenty of evidence that you can create abiogenesis events via chemical means. It's almost like the theistic-based arguments against science are all nonsense.
No, Jimmy. Science has no clue how chemical reactions on early Earth could have created life. Here is a quote from Eugene Koenig, which is part of the advisory editorial board of Trends in Genetics. He writes in his book, The Logic of Chance, from 2012. The origin of life is the most difficult problem that faces evolutionary biology, arguably biology in general. Indeed, the problem is so hard and the current state of the art seems so frustrating that some researchers prefer to dismiss the entire issue as being outside the scientific domain altogether, on the grounds that unique events are not conducive to scientific study. Origin of life research has evolved into a lively interdisciplinary field, but other scientists often view it with skepticism and even derision. This attitude is understandable and, in a sense, perhaps justified, given the dirty, rarely mentioned secret. Despite many interesting results to its credit, when judged by the straightforward criterion of reaching or even approaching the ultimate goal, the origin of life field is a failure. We still do not have even a plausible, coherent model, let alone a validated scenario for the emergence of life on Earth. Certainly, this is due not to lack of experimental and theoretical efforts, but to the extraordinary intrinsic difficulty and complexity of the problem.
The fact that Otangelo insists that during the call I said I do know. And in fact, you can see this comment he left in this comment that he says to anybody who will listen. At Jimmy Snow, you claim to know how life came from non-life. Since you gave me only 30 seconds in the end for a final statement, I was unable to ask. So what do you explain here how you know that science has an answer to that question? Genuinely wondering. You already have plenty of evidence that you can create abiogenesis events via chemical means. We just don't have a demonstration of the precise way it happened on this planet. But since nothing seems to escape this natural production.
What does that even mean? Nothing seems to escape this natural production. Atoms and molecules are just as happy to be as they are. Higher levels of structures for survival are never needed. Atoms never need DNA programming to function. They don't need molecular machinery to exist. Life is not even supposed to be here. There is no need for it to exist. It is not natural and would of itself, with high probability, never came about. So you think life was due to physical necessity? Let me quote what actual scientists have to say in this regard, Jimmy, like Stephen Banner, former Harvard University professor, about the Asphalt Paradox. Systems given energy and left to themselves devolve to give uselessly complex mixtures, asphalts. The literature reports to our knowledge exactly 0 confirmed observations where replication involving replicable imperfections, evolution emerged spontaneously from a devolving chemical system. It is impossible for any living chemical system to escape devolution, to enter into the Darwinian world of the living. Such statements of impossibility apply even to macromolecules not assumed to be necessary for evolution.
So there you see what I actually said, and in fact am very clear that I don't claim to know the specific event that happened. The only thing, as I've already stated during this episode, is that it appears to be likely a chemical, by chemical means, some.
So you are just playing word games here. While you confess that you don't know the specific event that it happened, you actually double down your claim again and say that it appears to be likely a chemical, by chemical means, some kind of chemical reaction. Not only are you begging the question, because natural chemical reactions are not the explanation by default, but on top of that, you claim that some kind of chemical reaction appears to be likely, but you entirely omit and do not give any compelling explanation whatsoever why such an event appears to be likely, and also ignore that there is actually an alternative explanation which is design. No chemist who actually understands this stuff, Jimmy, would agree with you, like James Tour, for example. He states, "It is clear chemists and biologists are clueless." I wrote, "Who think scientists understand the issues of prebiotic chemistry are wholly misinformed. Nobody understands them. Maybe one day they will, but that day is far from today. It would be far more helpful and hopeful to expose students to the massive gaps in our understanding. They may find a firmer and possibly a radically different scientific theory. The basis upon which we scientists are relying is so shaky that we must openly state the situation for what it is. It is a mystery."
That'd be weird, though. So anyway, the conversation develops and it gets to the question that I actually find very interesting and an answer that keeps coming up that's actually nonsense. So at one point during the call, as well as in the comments, which he leaves a ton of them that are just copy and pasted from his scripts, he talks about the improbability of the development of life and the development of the arrangement of nucleotides. And he talks about how it is so improbable that it is ignorant to say that it happened or that it would happen by chance. And so this is one of those moments.
The chance to have a minimal genome of 1.3 million nucleotides would be 1 to 10 to the 700,000th of power. So it's utmost irrational to believe that such complexity could come up by random chance.
All right, see ya. So the interesting thing we see there is the fact that Otangelo had been trying to hold my feet to the fire for claiming I knew something about the abiogenesis event.
Chemist Wilhelm Huck professor at Radboud University in the Netherlands said, "A working cell is more than the sum of its parts. A functioning cell must be entirely correct at once in all its complexity." Pelagibacter ubique is known to be one of the smallest and simplest self-replicating and free-living cells. It has a complete biosynthetic pathway for all 20 amino acids. They have about 1,300 genes and 1.2 million base pairs and code for about 1,300 proteins. What is the probability that the instructional code sequence would emerge by unguided random events? It is about 10 to the 700,000th power. This probability is hard to imagine, but an illustration may help. Imagine covering the whole of the USA with small coins, edge to edge. Now imagine piling other coins on each of these millions of coins. Now imagine continuing to pile coins on each coin until reaching the moon about 400,000 kilometers away. If you were told that within this vast mountain of coins there was one coin different to all others, the statistical chance of finding that one coin is about 1 to 10 to the 55. Now, if you would like to know how I can calculate these huge numbers, you can go to my YouTube channel, Intelligence Design Academy, and check there the video, The Factory Maker Argument. There I expose precisely how I come to these numbers.
For all I know, somebody in a basement somewhere's figured it out, but we currently don't know. So we have to talk about this argument in two ways. One, will grant him those monumental odds and say that that was the abiogenesis event. But then two, we'll talk about what the actual odds of an abiogenesis event on the Earth would be. So in granting him that argument about the odds that that is what it is, it's still not an impressive argument, because anything that happens on a cosmic scale is monumentally improbable. So for example, right now, somewhere in the world, a piece of space debris of some kind, or a small asteroid or something, is falling to the Earth and will make contact with the Earth. And you figure if you go pick up that rock and you go, what are the odds of it landing here? Well, with everything we know now, the odds are actually 100% because the event happened.
One shouldn't be surprised to find the right nucleotide sequence, because if it weren't so, we wouldn't exist, but eventually something else. Therefore, the fact that the life-giving sequence exists means that such odds should only be expected by the mere fact of our own existence. Not at all surprising. This is obviously a response begging the question. This argument is like a situation where a man is standing before a firing squad of 10,000 men with rifles, who take aim and fire, but they all miss him. According to the above logic, this man should not be at all surprised to still be alive, because if they hadn't missed him, he wouldn't be alive. The nonsense of this line of reasoning is obvious. Surprise to the extremely unlikeliness to have the right nucleotide sequence giving rise to proteins, which are essential for life to start, given the hypothesis of a mindless origin, is only to be expected in the extreme. You claim, Jimmy, is that every sequence is just as improbable as another. True that any particular equal-length sequence is just as improbable as any other. But if the goal is to have a sequence, a particular string with a prescribed specification, because a particular goal or function eventually be achieved, starting for example at 1, then counting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 until 500, then intuitively you know the sequence has a specific order. The sequence 1, 2, 3, 4 until 500 exhibits a specification or particular pattern. What must be explained is the origin not of any kind of sequence, but a particular specific sequence. Suppose you see a blueprint to make a car and an engine which has 300 horsepower to drive a Mercedes. Not any blueprint will produce this particular car engine with the right size and fit and power. Only a blueprint with the precise, specific, complex arrangement of orders that is understood by the common pre-established agreement between the engineer and the manufacturers will permit to be encoded, transmitted, decoded, and transformed in an equivalent artifact that has the specific, recognizable function which meets the pre-established goal. The information for that particular car engine can be encoded in bits. Let's suppose it's the size of a CD with 600 megabytes. What has to be calculated are the odds that specific sequence of instructions which permits to give rise to that particular car engine. Not any sequence will do.
And these apparent programs that we are reading that way, that we are describing that way, that aren't actually prescriptive in that way, the moment you would have to say something was designed or programmed would have to precede evolution and be that very first moment of abiogenesis.
So during your video, Jimmy, you continue asserting that the information in DNA doesn't have to be prescribed. Now, I would like to quote you what Richard Dawkins has to say in regards of this issue. He wrote in A Devil's Chaplain, "It is hard to exaggerate the sheer intellectual excitement of post-Watson Crick genetics. What has happened is that genetics has become a branch of information technology. The genetic code is truly digital, in exactly the same sense as computer codes. This is not some vague analogy, it is the literal truth." And another paper clarifies, "The DNA molecule is a linear sequence of symbols which stores the primary hereditary information from which the entire living organism is derived."
So when you're identifying the odds of an event that has already happened, something that has already occurred, you can put them in these cosmically ginormous numbers. Now, as you add factors like this planet will be here to bend it this way, you reduce those odds. And technically, if you knew everything about the universe, if you just had a sort of all-knowing, omniscient knowledge, you could actually add so many factors that you would get the odds to 100%, but just at their base odds, like with abiogenesis and evolution, yes, they seem very improbable. However, things of that level of improbability happen all the time.
I disagree, Jimmy, and this is why. The more statistically improbable something is, the less it makes sense to believe that it just happened by blind chance. Statistically, it is practically impossible that the primordial genome, proteome, and metabolome of the first living cell arose by chance. Furthermore, we see in biochemistry purposeful design. Therefore, an intelligent designer is by far the best explanation of origins and the first life.
And so to say an event that didn't happen, that must have happened because we see that it happened, because we have the product of it afterwards, the rock that we have picked up, or we have all of life on Earth and no reason to believe that it didn't come from natural means, despite not knowing yet the natural means by which it got here. We're still picking up the rock. It isn't compelling to go, this event is so improbable, it mustn't have happened. Now,
that is precisely what we are justified to say, Jimmy. Eliminative inductions argue for the truth of a proposition by arguing that competitors of that proposition are false, provided the proposition together with its competitors form a mutually exclusive and exhausting clause. Eliminating all the competitors entails that the proposition is true. Since either there is a God or not, either one or the other is true. As Sherlock Holmes' famous dictum says, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however not fully comprehensible but logically possible, must be the truth. Eliminative inductions in fact become deductions.
Not to mention that these same individuals don't want to talk about the concept of God as probabilities because there's no demonstration of the supernatural world, which makes probabilities pretty extremely high, if not actually zero.
Neither view, theism nor materialism, can be proven. Science will never demonstrate how reality came about. We can only look at the science available to us and find adequate philosophical explanations based on the evidence. The scientific method, nor any other, will never be able to demonstrate God's existence, nor the claim that the material universe is all there is. Historical events cannot be repeated. From what we know, we can decide which is the bigger leap of faith, which materialism as well requires. Any view, conclusion, and position is based on a leap of faith. It is just that, a leap of faith. Upon my understanding, there is extraordinary evidence for a creator. Therefore, theism requires the smallest leap of faith, and that points to a creator. In my view, it is the best hypothesis based on the evidence. Once that happens, the truth seeker can choose to investigate which creator best fits the bill. Without God's hiddenness, we would not have any significant freedom, and even those that hate God would be unable to fully live according to their wishes. Much like a criminal would find it intolerable living in the police station. God stays hidden to a degree. He gives people the free will to either respond to his tugging at their hearts or remain autonomous to him. There is enough light for those who desire to find him, and enough darkness for those that prefer to live autonomously to him. If you prefer being an atheist, God values your free will more than his desires for you. If you are really after truth, then have an open mind and follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if you don't like the conclusion.
Without knowing for sure what event either did happen or perhaps other ways it could happen, because for all we know, life has multiple ways of starting.
We do not know if life has multiple ways of starting naturally, if science has no clue how it could have happened even once. But besides the problem of having the right informational sequence, another striking problem plugs abiogenesis research. The basic molecules to kickstart life are complex, and no root of any of them has been successfully demonstrated to be possible to occur on the early Earth. The problems and open questions are monstrous. I have listed in one of my scripts 27 open questions in regards of the origin of RNA and DNA on the early Earth, 14 unsolved problems in regards of the origin of amino acids on the early Earth, 12 in regards of phospholipid synthesis, and also unsolved problems in regards of carbohydrate production. The open problems are in reality far greater. This just is a small list. How to go from the supposed prebiotic synthesis to the supposed fixation of carbon and nitrogen to clay, lightning, and so forth, to the way how cells synthesize the building blocks and fix carbon and nitrogen from the atmosphere, which are ultra-complex, irreducibly complex processes, is a huge mystery. and a huge gap which seems unbreachable. Now, this is not an argument from ignorance to say because materialistic claims are not substantiated, therefore God. If a theist would say, we don't know what caused X, therefore God, it would be indeed a God of the gaps fallacy. What we, however, say is, based on the current knowledge, an intelligent creative agency is a better explanation than materialistic means. If one is not arguing from ignorance, but rather reasoning from the available evidence to the best explanation, is it not rather a straw man to accuse us of launching a God of the gaps argument? Randomness is a hugely overplayed idea in modern science, a desperate attempt to fill a striking corner for materialistic reductionism.
But until we know at least one of them, we can't even begin to calculate the odds. We don't even know whether or not we have life in this solar system other than on Earth that started in other places. In fact, our closest neighbor that we actually have a presence on, we haven't ruled it out for Mars yet.
We know more, Jimmy, than you think. Life on other planets, a real possibility? The data demonstrates that the probability of finding even one planet with the capacity to support extraterrestrial intelligence falls short in 1 chance in 10 to the 122nd power. That is a number 1 followed by 122 zeros.
As long as we're talking about life that resembles the type of life on Earth. Because again, we don't know if the type of life on Earth is the only type of life there could be. There's a potential for silicon-based life, for example, that would have a different set of parameters required to live. They would actually likely be able to survive in more extreme conditions.
That silicon oxidizes to a solid is one basic reason as to why it cannot support life. Silicon doesn't form many compounds having handedness. Thus, it would be difficult for a silicon-based life form to achieve all the wonderful regulating and recognition functions that carbon-based enzymes perform for us. Despite years of work, and despite all the reagents available to the modern alchemist, many silicon analogues of carbon compounds just cannot be formed. Thermodynamic data confirm these analogues are often too unstable or too reactive.
Now, there are little things we do know, like that carbon-based life and the type of life we have on this Earth seems to only be able to exist under certain conditions. And we've created this sort of like Goldilocks zone where we can say with pretty good confidence that if a planet is not this close and receiving this much energy from the sun, have these certain elements present, though that wouldn't be part of the Goldilocks zone, but would be a part of evaluating if life might live somewhere. If there isn't, for example, oxygen and carbon, or at least not those things in sufficient quantities, that we can say the odds are extremely low without being able to number precisely what they are, but that the odds are extremely low of anything living outside of those qualifications.
Well, thank you, Jimmy, for actually making an argument for me, because the fine-tuning of the Earth is fantastic evidence of God's existence. Here, a syllogism in regards of the fine-tuning of the Earth. Not only the initial conditions of the universe, subatomic particles, the Big Bang, the fundamental forces of the universe, but also the solar system, the Earth and the Moon are finely tuned to permit life. The size of the Earth must be just right, and so gravity, planet Earth must have water, a just right atmosphere, oxygen for advanced life forms, rare earth minerals. It must be in the Goldilocks zone, that is, the distance from the sun must be in a life-permitting range, and also in the right distance from the galactic center. It needs a protective ozone layer, volcanic activity, it must have a protecting magnetic field, and the moon with the right size and distance from the Earth. Fine-tuning is either due to chance, necessity, or design. Fine-tuning is extremely unlikely due to chance or necessity, and therefore it is most probably due to a powerful creator which did set up the universe in the most precise exact fashion to permit life on Earth.
Despite the fact that evolution has no problem accounting for that complexity in the events, complexity that we see now compared to the past, and how if you look at the fossil record, life becomes simpler the further you go back.
At the time of the Cambrian explosion, nearly every animal phyla, the major taxonomic group of animals and plants on Earth, more than 70, suddenly appeared. So that is as well an inaccurate claim. Last not least, Jimmy, in the title of your video, you called me a dishonest Christian. One thing that I really can't stand is to be called this intellectually dishonest, or when I am explicitly outcalled the liar. I think you are taking advantage of the fact that a major part of your audience has not an academic or deeper understanding of the subjects we just discussed. That makes it easy for you to use such a cheap tactic just to hide your incompetence to deal with the issues that I raised during my call at your show and also through my copy-pasted scripts on the comments section, which you conveniently avoided to reply to any of those. As demonstrated, indeed, you claimed that chemical evolution appeared to be likely. So I understood you well. And I'm taking notice on everything that you said, and my wondering goes how you actually need to justify that claimed likelihood is what I justifiably question. Nothing of what you said during my call or here is dishonest. You, on the other hand, Jimmy, have exposed a lack of real understanding of these issues involved and once again brought evolution into the game, which has nothing to say about abiogenesis, and made tons of unfounded pseudoscientific claims. And worse of that, you are an influencer. You're blind, leading the blind. I wish you sincerely that you evaluate the information that I have provided through this video, and if you think the inference is unwarranted, feel free to explain why. Your entire materialistic worldview is, upon my understanding, deceptive, irrational, and not plausible. I also hope that the audience has gained a better understanding of why I am not convinced and incredulous towards materialistic claims, and why I think that design is by far the best explanation.